Welcome, friends, to another video segment of Science Talk. I am your host, Jim Massa. So, in this article appearing on the online publication Insight Climate News, corn-based ethanol may be worse for the climate than gasoline. Whoa. Long touted as a renewable fuel emitting 20% fewer greenhouse gases than gasoline, ethanol's emissions may be 24% higher. If verified, one expert said, the finding shows ethanol failed spectacularly. Wow. Okay. There's some farmer loading up grain. Looks like belly drop there. Ethanol made from corn grown across millions of acres of American farmland has become the country's premier renewable fuel, touted as a low-carbon alternative to traditional gasoline and a key component of the country's efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But a new study published this week finds that corn-based ethanol may actually be worse for the climate than fossil-based gasoline and has other environmental downsides. We thought and hoped it would be a climate solution and reduce and replace our reliance on gasoline, said Tyler Lark, a researcher with the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies in the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who's also the lead author of the study. It turned out to be no better for the climate than the gasoline it aims to replace and comes with all kinds of other impacts. Now, just as an aside here, because a lot of the corn goes to, production for ethanol, that means less corn available, for human consumption, even for agricultural use, such as feeding livestock. That actually drove up because there's less corn for eating purposes, that actually drove up the price of corn that you pay at the stores. So now the question becomes, and I'm not an economist, if that corn, if this shows that this ethanol-based fuel is not good, and therefore this is nothing to continue pursuing, does that corn then become more available for human consumption? Will that result in a reduced price of what you pay for corn at the stores? I have no idea. I'm just throwing that out there. Those of you who are economists, you can probably address that far better than I do. But the study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, PNAS, looked specifically at the effect of the Renewable Fuel Standard, RFS, which was first passed by Congress in 2005, updated in 2007, RFS 2. The standard requires that blenders add billions of gallons of renewable fuel to the country's transportation fuel supply every year, creating the world's biggest biofuels program. At the time, lawmakers and proponents hailed the standard as a major victory for the climate and part of an overall effort to reduce dependence on foreign oil. But in the 15 years since, its promises have yet to be fulfilled, critics say. And a mounting pile of studies shows corn ethanol has not dampened demand for fossil fuels as expected, but has instead forced the conversion of grassland and forests into croplands, both domestically and internationally, releasing carbon in the process. What have I said before about unintended consequences and unknown parameters and unexpected interactions? Think this could be one of them? In the new study, Lark and his colleagues found that after the RFS took effect, farmers expanded corn production on nearly 7 million acres each year, causing the conversion of lands to cropland, such that the carbon intensity corn ethanol produced under the RFS is no less than gasoline, and likely at least 24% higher. The policy the study said, also resulted in increased fertilizer use, increased water pollution, increased habitat loss. Oops. In a previous study from 2019, Larkin's colleague found that cropland expansion in the U.S., mostly for corn and soybean, has led to increased greenhouse gas emissions, but did not, at the time, connect that expansion to the RFS. Now he has. After the current standard took effect in 2007, the EPA, which runs the program, determined that ethanol from corn met the requirement that any renewable fuel under the program had to demonstrate a 20% reduction in greenhouse gases compared to gasoline. But the following year, so that would be '08, a study published in Science projecting that corn ethanol would double greenhouse gas emissions over 30 years because demand for corn would push farmers to plow up more carbon-rich forests and grasslands. Basically, you dig up the ground like that and you release CO2. And by the way, studies are showing that ocean trawling, we get those, that basically just bottom trawlers, they just scrape along the substrate, they dig up the ground to, basically vacuuming up everything on the seafloor. That's also releasing carbon dioxide. So it got the same idea. Disturb the land greatly, and CO2, that's part of the organic material, gets released. And then, of course, that study in Science created an ongoing debate about the wisdom, shall we say, about using ethanol as a fuel. In the following years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Research, a prominent agriculture-focused university, produced studies showing that corn-based ethanol reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 40 to 45%. In response to the new paper, the Renewable Fuels Association, RFA, pointed to those studies and said, the claims in this report simply don't align with reality and the facts on the ground, and the paper reads more like a fantasy novel than a genuine piece of academic literature. Well, it was peer-reviewed, it was published, and let's see. This is called new emissions. Maybe it is improved methodology. Maybe there was methodologies the previous studies did not adequately address. Or maybe there's some parameters or analyses that was not adequately addressed, where this new study does. Like anything else. Technology improves, analytical methods improve, and sometimes you can pick up on certain subtleties that previous research did not. And Searchinger, a researcher at Princeton University who was the author of the science study in '08, projecting the doubling of greenhouse gas emissions over 30 years, said the research the RFA uses to support the climate virtues of ethanol fail to adequately account for land use change, or it underestimates the carbon emission from converting forest and grassland to cropland. That goes right to the point I said about not accounting for certain parameters. Their numbers are invented out of whole cloth. Ooh, that's a stinging rebuke. The RFA points out that cropland for corn has not expanded since the onset of the standard, but the study's authors say they instead proved the counterfactual. What's important is what would have happened without the RFS, without this ethanol boom, said Lark. Without this policy, there would have been a big decrease in corn. The intent of the RFS and RFS2 was for other forms of renewable fuels, especially cellulosic ethanol from plant and wood fiber, to increasingly become part of the fuel mix. That has yet to happen. Instead, corn has become the backbone of the program. The Biden administration is set to revamp the renewable volume obligation, which is the percentage of renewable fuels required in the fuel mix under the law in the coming months. And then the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works is scheduled to hold a hearing. I want to discuss this briefly. Cellulosic ethanol from plant and wood fiber. This would be preferable. You're still going to raise corn, right? You're still going to have those hucks there. You're going to be raising other crops, soybeans, wheat, what have you. You're going to be raising these other crops. After you do the harvesting, you've got all this wood fiber. you take that wood fiber and you make the ethanol from that. Cellulose is, of course, a component of the cell walls that plants are made of. Cell walls around the cell membranes for individual cells. So there would not be any increase CO2 because you've already raised the crops. Now you got the harvest. You've done the harvesting. Now you've got all this dead material. So you might as well take that dead material and use that to get ethanol from. You won't be digging up lands. You won't be converting lands to croplands, grasslands and so on. So you eliminate that issue, which means you're reducing the CO2 emissions from that process, and you're now not having this material go to waste. To me, that is the approach that should be taken. I guess that was the intent. It just never happened, which is unfortunate because we've lost time now. From 2007 to now, that's 15 years. It said we could have been doing this right from the get-go, and slowly or quickly, depending on your perspective, move off of corn as ethanol and move to cellulosic sources. In other words, dead plant material from already harvested crops. That if you want to use ethanol to help reduce emissions, that's the way to go, in my opinion. And again, I'm not an agriculturalist, or botanist, what have you, but just looking at it from a carbon budget aspect, looking at it from the ecological aspect, and looking at basically getting 2 for 1. You grow crops and you use the dead material to make fuel. From those aspects, that should be something that should be pursued. Okay. There you go. Thank you for your time. Hello, folks. This is Jim here with Science Talk, asking you to please subscribe to my channel and to inform others of my channel and of the work that I do. Please share to social media platforms that you use. Also, as a reminder, don't forget to click the bell so that you know when I load up more videos. Finally, I ask that you support the work that I do by becoming a patron at patreon.com. Details in the description box below. Thank you for your support.